Let's welcome in now retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. He's a former congressman. He's also the senior advisor for the Patriot Academy. Colonel West, always great to see you.
Good to be with you, John. Thanks so much.
President Trump said that. We also heard John Kirby calling for negotiations, maybe a little late, but why haven't these negotiations started at this point, knowing that Vladimir Putin has a nuclear veto, essentially, in anything that happens? And we do see now these escalations, which were expected from him following this attack on the bridge that connects Russia to Crimea. Where are these negotiations, and why haven't they started yet?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that Zelensky and the Ukrainians are not open to negotiations. Why would they negotiate away their own country, their own territory? If something were to happen here in the United States of America and there was an incursion across our border, oh, by the way, there is, we would not want to negotiate away parts of Texas or New Mexico or Arizona. And I think the other thing we have to understand, this attack on that bridge that links Russia to the Crimea. Remember, it was during the Obama administration that Vladimir Putin came in and took over the Crimea. We did nothing. There was no deterrent there for him. And so now he is using that as a major communications and supply line. And so therefore it is open to strategic military assault and attack because he is using that to further his advancement into Ukraine. But I don't think that the Ukrainians should be looking for a negotiation. I think right now, your correspondent talked about the United Nations Security Council meeting. Well, guess who's on the United Nations Security Council?
Russia and China.
Be kicked off. Absolutely, they should be kicked off. And that's the kind of message we need to send as the international community.
Well, if the UN had any power at all, if there was a legit, in terms of dealing with these types of issues, you would see China join with the other members and kick Russia off the Security Council. We've never seen anything like that happen before. Why would we believe something like that would happen now?
Well, unfortunately, the United Nations is always the first to condemn Israel and the United States of America. But when you see these despots and dictators and theocrats, why haven't they kicked Venezuela out of the United Nations, period? Because of what we see happening there. But it would be an incredible step toward doing the right thing if the international community, started with the United Nations, put the isolation and more sanctions on Russia, and if China wants to continue to support Russia, put those sanctions and kick them off the Security Council as well.
Yeah, last week at a Democratic fundraiser at one of the Murdoch's house, we heard President Biden talk about nuclear Armageddon. Some people say that he wasn't misstating things when he said that. What's your read on those comments?
Well, first and foremost, it's foolhardy. It is really irresponsible rhetoric to say something like that. You're the leader of the free world. You're the president of the United States of America. You just don't throw around words such as Armageddon in this point in time. And actually what it ends up doing is showing Vladimir Putin that he is getting inside the head, inside the psyche of President Joe Biden. When we should look at Vladimir Putin and say, do not even think about doing something like this because you will cause incredible devastation and destruction and isolation on your own people. And I think right now, the biggest thing we need to do is enable the truth to undermine Vladimir Putin. Look at what is happening there. You've got young men seeking to leave Russia. You've got people that don't want to sign up to be conscripts. So the propaganda aspect of what he's trying to do, he's losing that war. And I think that's so important right now that we continue to help and aid in that.
This is something that a lot of people are concerned about right now. We also heard John Kerry defending President Biden's comments on nuclear Armageddon. I think we have a clip of that. Let's take a listen.
The president was reflecting the very high stakes that are in play right now, Martha, when you have modern nuclear power and the leader of that modern nuclear power willing to use irresponsible rhetoric the way that Mr. Putin has several times in just the last week or two, as well as the high tensions in Ukraine over just the course of the last few days.
Now, Colonel West, you mentioned the need to continue the support for Ukraine in this and to push back against Vladimir Putin. Do you believe he's capable of using tactical nuclear weapons, or do you think he's bluffing?
I think that this is more of a threat to try to get under the skin and get into the psyche of Western powers. And I believe that no one would win if he were to do such a thing. And he especially would not win in his own country. So I think right now you have to continue with the diplomatic pressure, the informational pressure, the economic pressure. And I think that we need to have an audit of that $40 billion that have gone to Ukraine. But the most important thing that we can provide to the Ukrainians is allow them to have the MiGs that they have been asking for so long, so that they can have the air cover over their own country, so that you don't have all of these rockets and missiles that are pouring down on them from within their own country. And I'd like to know, as a former artilleryman, what is happening with the HIMARS system, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, that we sent over to them, because that's supposed to create that parity so that you don't have this long-range artillery standoff that the Russians are very used to.
That's such a key point. You know, you hear from a lot of folks that we want to continue to support the war in Ukraine, but it's absolutely critical that we get an assessment and a proper accounting of where those assets are going and how that American money is being utilized over there as the Ukrainians continue to push back against the Russians. Great to see you, Colonel West. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Go Braves.
Go Braves. Yes,